He was alone on a dark road. He saw the lights in the distance and he thought to himself, I wish it would come closer so I could get a better look. And then it did. The object turned, descended, and headed straight for his car. And that's when he heard it, not with his ears, a voice inside his head, a voice that wasn't his own, telling him to not be afraid. This is the Hudson Valley UFO Wave, the early 1980s to the mid-1990s. Thousands and thousands of witnesses. Giant craft, football field sized or larger, hovering over highways, nuclear power plants, people's backyards. In the last episode, I covered witness accounts of some of the major sightings, including at the Indian Point nuclear power plant in Buchanan, New York. But there's another layer to the story, one that makes people deeply uncomfortable, one that gets left out of the documentaries. As a lawyer, when I read these accounts, I didn't know what to do with them, because these aren't people saying, I saw lights in the sky. These are people saying the lights talked to them. The lights knew what they were thinking. The lights took them. These witnesses include a police chief. They include people interviewed in some cases years apart, describing identical details that they'd have no way of coordinating. So I went back and I read their accounts again. And I asked myself, if these were witnesses in a criminal prosecution, would I believe them? And then there are the abductions, the accounts that don't make it into a History Channel special. Multiple witnesses, independent accounts, same general story. Small beings, a medical examination, and a message delivered telepathically. We're on a scientific mission, and you're being tested. I'm Tim Stone. I'm a lawyer in New York. I began my career as a prosecutor, and I'm also an author. This is part 3 of a deep dive into the book Night Siege, the Hudson Valley UFO sightings, co-authored by UFO debunker turned true believer J. Allen Hynek. In this episode, we're focusing on the high strangeness of the accounts in the Hudson Valley Wave that spanned the early 1980s through the mid-1990s. Welcome to Catskill Liminal Walk. The YouTube economy runs on people pressing like and subscribe and a couple other easy to press buttons that are completely free. If you enjoy this content, I'd really appreciate it if you'd consider pressing those buttons. To recap the last couple of episodes, which have also been about Night Siege, in the first Night Siege episode, we talked about the Dataset compiled by the authors of Night Siege, in which they documented thousands of witness sightings and experiences with the Hudson Valley UFO. And then the authors applied a layer of analytics to that data set to get a high-level view of what people were seeing and experiencing during this historic wave. Then, in the most recent episode, we dug into verbatim witness accounts taken from Night Siege. I wanted to look at what people were seeing and experiencing in their own words and focus on the often extraordinary characteristics of the craft observed in the Hudson Valley. This included the size, shape, colors, sound, and speed or lack of speed, the performance of these ships. Today, we're focusing on a too often neglected part of the UFO phenomenon and the Hudson Valley Wave in particular. It's the high strangeness, the telepathy, the observations of non-human entities, and most disturbingly, the abductions. Starting with this first account, the witness is driving and slowing even more in his car and peered through his windshield and is straining to make out some type of shape behind the lights. And I quote, "I thought to myself, I wish it would come closer so I can get a better look at it. And as soon as that thought went through my mind, the object began to descend and head straight for my car. It continued to approach, and Hanson, the name of the witness,
who became very emotional as he had described this part, said he could almost feel some sort of communication between him and the object. I felt thoughts that weren't my own, but a kind of voice telling me not to be afraid, he said. Suddenly, the object turned away and the beam of light vanished, Hanson said. He immediately sped past the parked cars and hurried home. He told no one about the experience, and his wife said that for several weeks he would walk outside at night and just stare at the sky. This next witness said, I thought about stopping to get a better look at it, stopping in his car, but decided against it. I was alone on the highway and I thought, what if this thing is hostile? And I decided not to stop. If I had to get away, then at least I'd be moving. I felt like whoever was in the ship was looking at me, since it seemed to follow my truck. The object traveled overhead for about 5 minutes. So this sense of being watched, and as if this thing is surveying and surveilling and following people around. Here's another witness. 3 or 4 minutes later, as he's observing it, the object started moving away, backing off. He said, I got a little upset. I said to myself, oh, please don't go. I want to look at you some more. At that split second, it stopped, made a complete turn, and then it was facing toward me. Then it started moving toward me very slowly. My daughter screamed, it's going to take us. I had mixed feelings. I wanted it to come closer, but I was getting frightened. I started backing toward the car, and then it stopped. It backed off, going into the hills off toward Farmers Mill Road. And here's another account. The traffic was stopped, and people were out of their cars looking up at it, talking about the craft. You could see people on the bridge pointing at it. I remember saying to myself, I wish I could get a better look at it. And as I was thinking that, this thing made a 360-degree turn, as if rotating on a wheel, stopped, and started to float in my direction. It continued to approach me, and I just stood there transfixed. It stopped 40 feet from me and was hovering 20 feet above a telephone pole in front of my house. The witness, Dennis, said the object was about 40 yards long and V-shaped, with the center pointing down toward the ground. It had numerous lights from end to end, red, green, and white. There seemed to be an amber light coming from it. This was in sequence from one end of the shaft to the other. He said, I call it a shaft because that's what it resembled. Yet another witness. About 15 miles farther north, the witness spotted the lights again, this time near Mount Storm ski slope at Stormville. It appeared to be hovering right over the ski slope, Galli said. I pulled off to the shoulder of the highway and got out. One of the red lights had a beam on it, a red light that came out. There were quite a few clouds in the sky, and the red light was bouncing off one of the clouds. I said to myself, I wish this thing would come my way so I could get a better look. And as I did, it started drifting toward me as if it was responding to my thoughts. I then got back in my car and left as the UFO approached because I had the feeling it was watching me. It was as big as a football field. I hit the gas pedal and sped away. I was upset and frightened. Here's another witness. It moved above us, and as it went over, we heard a faint humming sound. It moved to the right and then the left. We watched it for half a minute, and then all of a sudden the lights went off. I had the feeling that it knew we were watching. Another witness. I got out my flashlight and flashed it on and off. Then it flashed at me. Then it started to make a circle right in front of us. This went on for 5 minutes. I flashed my light 3 times, and it would flash its light 3 times. It was close enough that I could see it had 8 lights and small red lights underneath. This account involved a chief of police, a local chief of police from around that area in the Hudson Valley. He was on a boat out on a lake with several friends, including his nephew. It had 20 to 30 lights. Here's this thing in the air, all kind of lights, blue, red, orange, green, spaced together. Bright. They looked like they were turning in a circular motion. While it was turning, the object was still motionless. It wasn't moving from that spot. He goes on. The object was noiseless. They shut off the boat's lights, and then the object also shut its lights off, stopped, and hovered. It was very quiet. For a few minutes, his friend turned the boat lights on and off, and the object's lights reacted again. The lights became brighter and brighter, almost a yellow. The object then moved behind the mountains and disappeared. The chief described how his nephew was so frightened at one point that he almost jumped overboard. Another witness said, I stood by the door for a long time just trying to think of rational things it could be. Could it be fire? It was so bright in the color of it, I thought, no, it's got definite shape. And it had what appeared to me like headlights, but they were huger than headlights. They were just enormous in size. It couldn't be a truck. It was just too big to be anything like that. I just kept observing it, and I flicked on the outdoor floodlights for some reason. And when I flicked on the floodlights, it moved. It turned toward the left. I shut the lights off, and it shifted back. I put the lights on again, and this time it shifted to the right. Then I decided I was going to leave the lights off altogether. I was getting nervous. I actually felt like this object was watching me. I was very intimidated by it. I walked away from the window quite a few times, thinking that when I went back, it would be gone. I just stayed the entire time. Again, the sense of being watched. It's just so disconcerting when you're thinking about this gigantic craft following you around, hovering in the air and paying attention to you. Usually when we see a plane in the sky or a helicopter, it's passing by. It's going somewhere. You know, we don't feel like we're the target of that craft. But to have this gigantic craft hovering, moving slowly, silently, and to think it's focusing on you, you're getting this feeling that it's watching you. And in some cases, as I've described, it's reacting to your thoughts, or it's actually saying things to you, is just stunning. Here's an incident with a family, a witness, the witness's mother and the witness's son. My mother, my son, and myself were returning after having dinner in Elmsford, New York. I know Elmsford. We had just turned onto Sleepy Hollow Road in Briarcliff Manor when we spotted a large group of bright lights in the sky ahead of us. I told my mother and son that I thought it was the UFO that everyone had been seeing in the area over the past 10 years. My son suggested that we pull over to the side of the road so we could get a better look at it. It was very large, at least the size of a football field, and it was moving slowly and had many lights on it. There was one large light in the middle, and the lights were in the shape of a huge triangle. The lights were yellow and white. We rolled down the windows, but we heard nothing. We sat there for a couple of seconds watching it. Then it stopped in midair, hesitated for a moment, and began to back up toward us. I can't tell you how weird that looked and how it made us feel. It was like the thing spotted us and was backing up to get a better look at us. My mother started yelling for me to get out of there, and we all had this strange feeling that it was after us. I sped up the road as fast as I could. This final segment goes beyond, I won't say it goes beyond high strangeness, but it's quintessential high strangeness, I guess you could say. These are abduction experiences associated with the Hudson Valley UFO Wave. These very, very rarely get talked about. Most people, most mainstream people, wish them away. Here's the first witness. In April, I was sleeping in my bedroom when all of a sudden I was awakened by a beam of light coming through the window. It engulfed my entire body. It felt like it was penetrating through me. I felt it and was shocked as my entire body from head to toe was paralyzed. I lay there about 10 minutes, and all the time I felt as if my insides were being probed, like a doctor was probing my insides. I was terrified, but there was nothing I could do. Then, as I lay there, these images started to flash in my mind. Images of lights flashing all different colors. Then I saw this image of a being with clay-like skin and a large head with large eyes. He had no hair and no mouth. He assured me that I would come to no harm and said that I was being tested. He told me, in my mind, that he was part of a team of explorers studying the people. Then I passed out and woke up the next day. I was so upset that I did not tell anybody about it. It was not a dream, but a real experience. It was an experience by a woman named Ellen in April 1983. She was awakened in the middle of the night by a man's voice in her bedroom. It frightened her, and she tried to awaken her husband, who was sleeping soundly beside her. However, nothing she could do would wake him up. The voice was getting louder and louder. It sounded like gibberish. Then, clear and loud, the voice said, "Do not be afraid. We will not harm you." The voice seemed to be coming from the radio on the night table, but she knew the radio was off. Then, through the skylight above the bed, she saw flashes of multicolored lights, and she could hear a low humming sound. It was as if something was just above the house. I'm wondering what these craft are doing, hovering around this crowded suburban area in the northeastern United States, and this is one thing they appear to be doing. We've got people in their homes, these craft out above them, and these craft interacting with them in their bedrooms, in their sleep. Here's a witness who saw the UFO with some children around him and then returned home after that experience. And this is what he said. When I got home, I felt a little dazed. I went to bed early and had this strange dream. In the dream, the same thing happened, but this time the kids and I were pulled up into the UFO. 1 minute I was looking up at it, and the next minute we were inside, and there were these guys. There were about 5 of them, and they were working around some kind of strange control panel. They were about 5 foot, 4 inches tall, and had big heads and small mouths and little ears. They had on black suits with buttons up and down the front. And he continued, saying one of these guys came up to him and said, "Don't worry, we won't hurt you." They told me it was some kind of test and that they were doing some kind of study of the people in the area. They said their mission to our planet was a peaceful, scientific one. The inside of the ship looked like it had computers everywhere with all different colors flashing all over the place. It hurt my eyes to look at them. They moved me and sat me in some type of chair and did something to me with different machines up and down my body. The kids were also in the room with me, also sitting in chairs, and it looked like others were doing to them what this one guy was doing to me. They kept telling me that they would not harm me or the kids, when all of a sudden, boom, I'm back in the Jeep. One of the witnesses, or at least one, underwent hypnosis. And this is from the transcript of the session. The hypnotist asked, "What is it that you're afraid of? Afraid that you'll see?" The witness, her name is Monique, said, "These things." "What are these things?" "Like people." "What do they look like?" "Bald, big heads." "Did they speak to you?" "No." "Are they involved with the pressure on your chest?" "They're walking around. They're gray, skinny fingers, touching panels like discs, knobs." The next account. "I got out of my car and walked over to the other cars. The people outside their cars said that as this object went over, there was no sound. It was getting dark and I could see a glow in the woods. I wanted to investigate, but nobody would go with me. He thought maybe an aircraft had gone down in the woods. I grabbed my flashlight and started walking into the woods. I went about 1/4 of a mile and came to a hill. The glow was getting brighter, and I knew something was on the other side. As I climbed to the top of the hill, I could see some type of lighted object, but trees blocked my way. I climbed down the hill and came to a clearing. I was shocked to see an object that looked like a dark triangle hovering in the trees. This was very strange since it wasn't above the trees, but in the trees. This calls to mind the Rendlesham Forest UFO encounter. I tried to get a little closer when I heard a noise coming from it. I then saw this figure wearing some type of suit approaching the object. I hid behind a bush. This man, or whatever it was, got right to the object and then looked in my direction. I felt he knew I was there, and then I heard thoughts in my head saying I shouldn't come close. The guy raised his hand as if to say goodbye, and then the object vanished. That man was of average height, and the suit was dark with glowing metal-like stripes around the arms and wrist. He didn't see his face, but was sure that there was some type of helmet on his head. A woman who gave her name as Jane, she wanted to be anonymous, related her experience to the authors, an experience that occurred on July 14th, 1988. It was 2 or 3 in the morning. I woke up out of a deep sleep and my heart was pounding. I felt like there was someone in the room, but all I saw was a dim light in the far corner. Then all of a sudden, several hands grabbed me from around the bed. I closed my eyes and tried to scream, but I couldn't move or say anything. Nothing came out of my mouth. I then found myself lying on a table, and there were 4 little men in hoods and loose clothing standing around me. They were talking with each other, but I couldn't understand it because it sounded like gibberish. I couldn't see their hands, but I felt them all around me. Their faces looked like a light blue color, with all wrinkles that made them look like one of those dogs with all the wrinkles. Then all of a sudden, they all just stepped aside, and this man came in. He was tall and had white skin and no hair. He had large round eyes and was very slim. He came over to the table and talked to me in English. He said he was surprised that I was so scared because the last time he met me, he thought he made it clear that he would return to ask a favor. He then raised his hand in gesture, and a woman walked into the room. She looked very human and a little too perfect. I mean, she looked better than any model I ever saw. She had a bundle in her hand and walked over to me. It was a baby, but it didn't look quite human. The tall being, who was some type of well-respected leader, told me that he wanted me to take the baby and care for it because they need the love of a mother, and this was an emotion that they didn't understand and weren't capable of. I told the man I couldn't because I already had a child and it was hard enough raising one alone. He moved his head up and down as if agreeing with me and passed his hands across my eyes. I then blacked out and found myself in my bedroom, and it was daylight. Well, that's it for my deep dive into the Hudson Valley UFO sightings and the book Night Siege. Tens of thousands of people, maybe hundreds of thousands of people, were impacted by these events, by this interaction, by observation of, and in many cases, interaction with this non-human intelligence or intelligences. For many of these people, it changed their view of the world, of what exists in the world, of whether we're alone here. And it changed those witnesses, how they raised their children, and it changed their children's beliefs about the world and successive generations. There are knock-on effects. When a person has this kind of experience, there'll be almost like ripples of effects where that experience influences how that person engages with people around him or her, including how they raise their children, and then how the children raise their children. If you take what was told to these witnesses at face value by these entities, then this was some kind of scientific experiment where we were being studied. It's akin to how we study animals, how we will tranquilize or sedate a large mammal, maybe a lion, on the plains of the Serengeti in Africa, and we'll run some experiments and tag the creature, do some tests, and then let the creature go. We don't mean that lion harm. We just want to learn from that animal and maybe try to help that animal's breeding population, help it grow, help it avoid some kind of population collapse. It's very weird to think of us, what we perceive ourselves to be an apex species, to be treated as an animal that's being studied and examined and maybe helped, but that's what appears to be happening in this case and many other cases.
Thank you for watching. As I've mentioned, if you enjoyed this episode, then you'll enjoy the previous 2 episodes, which have also been about Night Siege, about some high-level takeaways based on the data set of the sightings and experiences from this wave, this UFO wave, prepared by the authors of Night Siege, and then an episode about first-hand encounters, testing to the extraordinary characteristics of the craft that were witnessed in the Hudson Valley during this long stretch of time. In the next episode of Catskill Liminal Walk, and I think I will be walking again, we're going to talk about a book by an author named Terry Hanson that was released in the early 2000s called The Missing Times. And it's about the secrecy and cover-up surrounding the UFO topic for decades now, and about media complicity in this cover-up. It's going to be really fascinating, and we're probably going to go a few episodes on The Missing Times by Terry Hanson. I hope you join me again. Until then, I'll see you next time on Catskill Liminal Walk.